Hey guys, so today is going to be a little bit of a different video. We have with us here Betty Images. If you haven't heard of her, please look her up immediately. Her TikToks are fantastic. You know, I actually discovered you on Instagram, not TikTok, which is kind of funny.
Cool. Instagram's been doing better than I expected. Also, hi everyone, I'm Betty Images. Thanks for tuning in.
All right, so let's get into it. Today we are talking about socialism. Woo! I know that my small handful of right-wing followers are so excited. Looking at you, Jeff. I have a coworker named Jeff.
Wait, I have a coworker named Jeff whose last day was Friday. Ugh, I no longer have a coworker named Jeff.
That's so sad. I feel like everybody needs a coworker named Jeff. I feel like that's the staple. You know, I embarrassingly recently got into politics, to be honest with you, pretty much like 2019. And so I've noticed that I have like a lot of gaps in my knowledge about things, like the current Afghanistan crisis. Oh, yeah. I knew like nothing about that until like a week ago.
It's okay, Afghanistan's, I mean, I'm no expert on the Middle East, but it seems to be a really like decades and decades of suffering from the Western imposition of like a very like Western United Nations, League of Nations kind of idea of statehood onto Afghanistan after it was colonized. But Afghanistan itself is like a very like tribal, non-fixed place. I mean, which is like, I mean, once again, the same kind of, not exactly the same, but very similar to things that have happened in like with like something like the Rwandan genocide. You impose statehood in a very like Western liberal, like classically liberal sense onto a community of people who want nothing to do with that and historically have no precedent for that. And then suddenly like you leave. Mm-hmm. But you leave in a way that forces that group of people to remain totally dependent on you economically. And then of course, like people are gonna, I mean, of course people are gonna like become terrorists. Like I'm not like pro-terrorism, but I like totally see why this like super reactionary, I mean, it's incredibly reactionary. The Taliban is reactionary, but I totally see why that's happening given what like large wealthy foreign nations have done to Afghanistan. But I was trying to read about like the Soviet Union's involvement in basically trying to, I mean, the reasoning was like helping Afghanistan resist like the imposition of like American capitalism and essentially like economic neocolonialism. And then the US got involved because they were like, God, the USSR can't make Afghanistan communist. And then the US began funding in resistance groups and insurgent groups who then went on to become really large-scale terror organizations that now terrorize the US. But like we have to see, I think from the American perspective, that it's not just like that this is a terror group that like some like Al-Qaeda. I think the same thing could be said for like ISIS or the Taliban. A lot of terror groups, broadly speaking, aren't just like terrorizing the US. They're also like within their country a force that can resist the imposition of American imperialism. So I don't see how that could have gone well. I don't know. We just really need all that opium to make opioids for the sacklers, I guess. So we're gonna have
That's another thing that Shuan had mentioned in her recent Hell World video. I guess some like big pharma CEOs got caught calling opioid addicts pillbillies.
Oh yeah, pillbillies.
And like said a bunch of terrible shit.
It's got a super like class overtone to it. I think people associate opioid addiction with like a backwoods kind of like white rural America, the same way that like crack was associated with like Black and Latino populations in America. But if we look at it, I'm like, it's because opioids are marketed to that group of people. It's because they're like pushed onto them because they're dependency forming. In the same way that like crack was pushed into Black neighborhoods. And it's like very nefarious that then the people who are victimized by this really like large scale legal drug scheme then get blamed for what's happening to them. And addiction is like a cash cow. It's like cigarettes. You can't like, once the person's addicted, they're gonna keep paying for them. It's dark. Yeah.
Yeah, things are looking kind of bleak. But speaking of, I was listening to you just talk about Afghanistan, and you definitely know a lot more than I do. And I think the same will probably be true on socialism.
I claim no expertise on Afghanistan. If I got anyone can correct me on that. Socialism, the workers owning the means of production, sorry, nationalizing the means of production. I think, okay, what if I have to like say like justify socialism, I'm like, I don't think it's gonna be like a do we want to, can we? It's gonna be like there's like literally we're gonna have like no choice. There's no other way to move forward except to fall into like a really like dystopian capitalist kind of like Soylent, like the movie Soylent Green, where like at the end they discover that the weird little wafers that the government feeds the poor are actually made out of like ground up human beings.
I've never seen that movie. That sounds terrifying.
It's honestly kind of a good movie.
Soylent Green, that's what it was called?
Soylent Green. Which is funny because that's where the guy who invented Soylent got the name Soylent from.
Really?
Right? Isn't that weird? But
yeah, it's a weird movie for inspiration.
But yeah, I definitely consider myself a socialist. I'll read the Wikipedia definition for it. So everyone can work off the same like rubric, but then I'll say my take. Socialism is a political and economic theory of social organization which advocates that the means of production, distribution, and exchange should be owned or regulated by the community as a whole. This can like very literally happen, like the Soviet Union. It was a very literal example. Cuba is a very literal example. You can have elements of socialism existing in part of government. I mean, like Social Security in the US is actually Franklin Delano Roosevelt's little socialist brainchild. And Social Security goes a long way in helping to alleviate human suffering, and it's something we can easily afford. Though we'd rather spend money going to war and making defense contractors money, you know. Socialism also can exist in, I think like a really practical way to do it is to like nationalize things that I feel like it's like kind of amoral to profit from, like water. Like I think it's really weird. It's really awful that there are private water companies.
I found out recently that Bill Gates bought up like half the farmland in America and is now the biggest farmer in the nation.
Yeah. Bill Gates, the billionaires know what's happening. I think they're very well. I read quite a while ago that like if you're going to make a long-term investment, you should invest in necessary natural resources like real estate. Like no one can live without shelter, or water is a really big one right now because we're gonna be really low on fresh water in the next few decades, or farmland. And it's looking kind of bleak.
Yeah.
The same thing happened with this company called BlackRock. It's like a really large wealth management firm. Okay, buying up all the houses, like tons of real estate. And it's not just BlackRock doing it. It's like a bunch of other like giant Uber banks doing it. But like they are literally outbidding single families for homes. And it's already so hard to buy a home that everyone's just going to become like a renter, and we're going to like re-enter feudalism.
It's so crazy.
Utilities as a whole, I think now something like nationalizing utilities under socialism, nationalizing healthcare. That's the hill I will die on. Healthcare. This is like literally the hill I will die on. It's definitely a human right. You will die without it. It's violent to deny someone insulin because they can't afford it. Like that's just so like convoluted.
I think like as far as the healthcare thing goes, you know, I actually didn't have health insurance in college, and one, that sucked ass. But two, I think I saw a tweet that was like, after COVID, I think we all realized that healthcare should be socialized because health is like public, like social.
Yes, it's a public good. It's so necessary. Also, like health, like health, a person's health isn't a commodity that can be sold in a market. Like the whole point of a market is you have a consumer making choices, like with a consumer with agency making choices about what to buy, and you don't have a choice between being healthy and being sick. Like that's not a choice. People don't choose to be sick, and simultaneously you can't choose. You need to be healthy. It's not like an option. And the fact that we have the resources to provide for people, I mean, like I'm at a point where like my health insurance is tethered to my job, and I'm like, man, I hate my job. Just keep doing it, because there's no other, what if something happens? There's no choice.
Yeah, and I think like the thing that really just kind of pushed me over the edge was it occurred to me like, who do I think isn't deserving of healthcare? Because like when I'm thinking about like what is a right and what isn't a right, I try to think like, well, who shouldn't be able to do this? Like, it's not a right to have a job. If you never go in to work on time and you slack off all day, then I could see you not having a job. Healthcare is not at all like that. Like I can't think of anybody who I think shouldn't receive healthcare they need.
That's a really good point. and a really good way to think about it. Because then that makes me think there is really someone at like United Healthcare, health insurance, who's like, you know what, I don't think this person deserves healthcare because they don't have a job. Or like, you know what, I don't think this person deserves healthcare because cancers was a pre-existing condition for them. Like, that's actually insane. That's so lacking empathy. I think that a lot of ideas on the left get characterized as insane, but actually, like, a lot of the ideas on the right are really viciously violent and insane. Like leaving kids without healthcare, or like the pharmaceutical industry holding a family hostage for like hundreds of thousands of dollars because their kid got leukemia. Like, what?
Yeah, and like, so I grew up in like a very poor family, and I went to I did really well in high school, did really well on like all the standardized test bullshit, and I got some scholarships to go to college, and I went to college to become an engineer. So I like did everything right as far as what like a good conservative white girl in the South should do. I'm not conservative, but you get what I'm saying. Like I did all the things right that they say we're supposed to do. I worked hard. Supposedly this is America, American dream. I can do whatever I want.
We'll be billionaires too one day if we just grind.
But like, I remember fracturing one of my ribs and having to decide if I wanted to pay the $100 to get an x-ray or not in college, because I didn't have health insurance. I didn't have any money. What was I supposed to do? And like, I remember I had a conversation with one of my Republican friends about that, and I was like, because they said, well, if you make bad decisions, you're going to reap what you sow financially. And I was like, okay, how about this scenario? What was the bad decision that I made there? What did I do wrong as like a 20-year-old that I found myself without health insurance? Yeah, it's just something that I think about with like some of the arguments that people throw out like on the right wing side.
I think you make a good point when you say like, what did I do wrong as a 20-year-old that left me without health insurance? It's like the conservative political thought in general in the US especially, wants to like place blame for everything onto an individual and totally ignores the existence of systemic issues. Like, it's really messed up that your health insurance is tied to your work, and then your children's health insurance is tied to your work. And if you don't work, you're just left to die. It gives people no choice in what they do, or you end up being held hostage financially, in the same way that like you have to have like a credit score to rent. Like you have to be in debt in order to rent, to like house yourself. It like forces you to interact with honestly like a danger. Like, I think credit cards can be incredibly dangerous for people. Like, I know a lot of people with credit card debt, and I'm like, people are literally forced to engage with like the debt system if they want to have a roof over their head here. It was only like maybe over a year ago that I discovered that credit scores like aren't a thing in other places.
Yeah, same.
I was like,
that blew my mind, honestly.
How are we mad at China for having a social credit score? Like, we invented this. Like, the US invented this. The credit score was invented in like 1989, was like the birth of the FICO credit score. It's like younger than my mom. I'm like,
dang. I actually did not know that one. I did not know it was that young. Wow.
I'm gonna fact check myself right now, but the FICO score was first introduced in 1989 by FICO, then called Fair Isaac and Company. The FICO model was used by the vast majority of banks and credit grantors, and is based on consumer credit files of 3 national credit bureaus, Experian, Equifax, and TransUnion. Oh my god, credit score in the United States has its own Wikipedia page. It's long.
That is so young. 32 years?
32. Oh my god. When you give it an age, it's like, I'm like, it's a millennial.
So this kind of brings me to one of my questions about some of the content that you put out. So we talked a little bit about how like you really don't have any choice as like an individual as to what you're going to do, especially with your job, which I definitely think tying healthcare to your job is totally just a way that corporations can like further control us. But you say often that the US isn't a free market, or doesn't have a free market. What do you mean by that?